भाई कौन? सुधीर कनेक्ट कर ही दो यार, एक से तो कनेक्ट कर दो।
प्रबीर जी से करना है।
पहले प्रबीर से करना है। कनेक्ट कर ही दो ना, फिर ही शुरू करेंगे। एसी धीरे करवा दो यार। आपने भी करवाया?
जी
एसी करवाओ यार, ठंड लग रही है।
Yes, can you hear me?
We can hear you, but your camera is not on.
Yeah, just putting it on.
ओथ व्हाट्सएप कर दिया इनको। हाँ नहीं, पर मैं करवा दूंगा। शुड बी स्टार्ट?
Yes.
आप सभी सदस्यों का आज पीस एंड हार्मनी कमेटी की इस बैठक में स्वागत। कोरम पूरा है तो हम इस कमेटी की कार्रवाई को शुरू करते हैं। जैसे कि सभी सदस्य जानते हैं, कुछ कंप्लेंट्स इस समिति को प्राप्त हुई थी सोशल मीडिया के कुछ प्लेटफॉर्म्स, इन पर्टिकुलर फेसबुक की कार्यशैली को लेकर। कुछ न्यूज़ आर्टिकल्स के हवाले से कई चीज़ों को इस कमेटी के संज्ञान में लाया गया था और इस कमेटी ने तुरंत प्रभाव से उसका संज्ञान लेते हुए एक कार्रवाई शुरू करी, जिसमें कई विटनेसेस, कई गवाहों का, कई सबूतों को इस कमेटी के सामने पेश किया गया। आज उसी श्रृंखला में कुछ साथी, आज कुछ लोग इस कमेटी के सामने आएंगे, कुछ एक्सपर्ट्स, डोमेन एक्सपर्ट्स, जिनसे ये समिति सवाल जवाब करेगी और गहराई से इस विषय को जानेगी और सबूत इकट्ठा करने का प्रयास करेगी। आज के जो हमारे विटनेस हैं, प्रबीर जी, वो वीडियो कॉन्फ्रेंसिंग के माध्यम से इस समिति से जुड़ गए हैं। Mr. Prabir, before we commence the questions, I would like you to take the oath and I would like you to repeat after me. I, your name please.
Prabir Purkashta.
Swear in the name of God.
Swear.
Or solemnly affirm.
And solemnly affirm.
That I shall speak the truth.
That I shall speak the truth.
The whole truth.
The whole truth.
And nothing but the truth.
And nothing but the truth.
And that no part of my deposition shall be false.
And no part of my deposition shall be false.
Now, Mr. Prabir, kindly identify yourself and give a brief introduction of your experience before the members of this committee.
I'm an engineer by profession, though I'm now no longer practicing because of my age. But I also have been involved in looking at digital platforms, digital technologies for a long time. I'm also the president of Free Software Movement of India and the co-chair of an international body which looks at, again, internet issues.
Mr. Prabir, the committee takes note of an article written by you, which I hold in my hand, captioned "Facebook's business model thrives on virality of hate," dated 1st September 2020. Are you the author of this article?
Correct, I am.
Now, Mr. Prabir, I will read out an excerpt from this article and then ask you a few questions. The excerpt goes like this. Facebook also has recently invested $5.7 billion in leading Indian telecom company Reliance Jio for 9.99% of its shares, one of the largest investments ever by any tech company for a minority stake. Now, what do you think are the precipitating reasons, force, etc. behind such a huge investment?
Well, Reliance Jio has become the monopoly, virtually the leading monopoly in telecom. And therefore, a lot of the leading tech companies in the world who look at the Indian market think that unless they team up with Reliance Jio, they may not get proper access to the Indian subscribers of Jio. So effectively, Jio is using its monopoly position, and companies like Facebook are helping it as well as helping themselves to become the dominant players in the Indian telecom sector, particularly on internet business.
Now, do you think that the quantum of the enormous investment like this has some impact on the socio-political milieu or the fabric of this country, and should it, or you think it should be viewed only as a commercial economic transaction?
You know, the issue of telecommunication as well as internet has to be looked at slightly differently. These are essentially or should be seen as public utilities, and they have always been kept either in the government or have been regulated very strictly because they have the ability to distort the basic fabric of democracy in any country. Therefore, communications should not be looked upon as any other business, but something which affects every citizen, because it's not only about information, it's not only about talking to each other, but it also has a direct impact on the democracy in any part of the world.
So do you think that a total market capture strategy dilutes the law enforcement agencies' hold to nab these social media giants as and when they violate various laws of the country?
So there are two aspects to this. One is, do we have the laws under which we can control the internet giants,
right,
the digital monopolies that we are talking about?
Right.
And the second is the willingness of the agencies concerned to even use the modicum of power that they have on these companies. Facebook, for instance, has taken a position, so has Google, that they're not bound by Indian law, they're only bound by US law, because their parent jurisdiction is US. And therefore, if we want them to really accept our laws, then we have to take much stronger action on them than we have done hitherto.
I see. Now, I will quote another excerpt from your article, the one that you have authored. It says, this is not the first time Facebook's sheltering of hate speech and divisive right-wing figures has been exposed. In a 2017 article from Bloomberg, Lauren Etter, Vernon Silver and Sarah Ferrier wrote that Facebook actively works with political parties and leaders, including those who use platform to stifle opposition, sometimes with the aid of troll armies that spread misinformation and extremist ideologies. They also wrote that a little known Facebook global government and politics team, led from Washington by Kate Harbath, a former Republican digital strategist who worked on former New York Mayor Rudy's 2008 presidential campaign, has helped specific political parties from India and Brazil to Germany and the United Kingdom. The unit's employees have become de facto campaign workers. Now, in the said article, which has been written by you, there is a reference made to a few articles that suggest that Facebook shelters hate speech, actively works with political parties and leaders, including those who use this platform to stifle the voice of the opposition, sometimes with the aid of troll armies that spread misinformation, extremist ideology. What's your own opinion upon the said subject based on the material available with you?
Okay, now there are two aspects again to this issue. One is that Facebook's business strategy is to get more eyeballs and more attention, and it finds aligning with right-wing political forces is something that helps its business case, its business to grow faster. Partly because the right-wing forces do not have the same kind of salience in news media. Therefore, the troll armies that you have just mentioned, which I wrote about, they are very well known to work with various right-wing forces in different countries,
Okay.
whether it's India, it's Brazil, or United States. So the alliance between Facebook and its right-wing forces is an alliance between the politics of the right-wing forces and the business interest of Facebook.
All right. Now, what do you think are the adverse fallouts of hate speech and fake news disseminated over a platform like Facebook? And according to your experience, has it caused disruption of peace and harmony, or engineered a riot-like situation, a communal riot-like situation?
I think this is something that is almost accepted universally by everybody, that Facebook as a platform is being used for hatred, divisive politics, and has led to riot-like situations not only in India but also elsewhere. One of the classic examples of this was with the United Nations investigated Facebook for the Rohingya massacres
In
and
Myanmar.
said very openly that this is there in the report, that Facebook played a role in the massacres that took place, the genocidal violence that was unleashed on the Rohingyas. Again, in this country, we have enough instances in communal riots and other violence that has taken place of the Facebook as well as WhatsApp groups' messages playing an important role. And even the government admits that this is the reason they have stopped in Kashmir, in the internet, virtually, for long periods. And we have, I think, the largest number of stoppage of internet in the world, what is called Section 144 being declared on the internet. So I don't think anybody disagrees with the fact that yes, Facebook does communicate, WhatsApp does communicate to riot-like situations and communal violence.
So, since you mention of instances in India of communal violence, riot-like situation, communal simmering, flagration, so on and so forth, what are your thoughts on the communal clashes that happened earlier in the year in the NCT of Delhi, with regard to content on social media?
I think that your committee would already have found from other evidences and also what's been publicly reported that WhatsApp messages and Facebook played a very important role in making worse the communal scenario and hatred, communal scenario and communal hatred in Delhi in those days. Specifically, there were groups which were propagating the idea that Muslims need to be removed, should be attacked, and we have had various BJP leaders say this in public. So I think that record is very much there, and I don't think this is something that needs more elaboration. The question is who, their only argument is we did not start it, but that is something that that doesn't absolve them. Whether they did or did not start it does not absolve them of the kind of statements they made, which definitely are actionable under Indian law.
Right. Now, another excerpt from your article, and I'll quote it. The August 14 Wall Street Journal article identified three prominent BJP leaders whose Facebook posts included hate speech. T. Raja Singh, a state legislator from Telangana, had threatened to kill Muslims who ate cows and to shoot Rohingyas. Muslim refugees fleeing Myanmar. Anant Kumar Hegde, a member of parliament from Karnataka, posted cartoons and essays on Muslims spreading Corona jihad. Now, the Wall Street Journal article reported that after it asked Facebook about some of the BJP leaders' posts, Facebook deleted those posts and said Mr. Singh no longer is permitted to have an official verified account designated with the blue checkmark badge. Now, you have referred to the Wall Street Journal article which states that Facebook took no action against the BJP legislator such as T. Raja or Anant Kumar Hegde, and until the journal sought a comment or a response from Facebook, Facebook did not remove that content. Now, why did Facebook drag its feet over the entire issue and fail to take any action against these delinquent persons by applying its community standards.
Yeah, let me sort of give a little more background to the Wall Street Journal article than I did in my article that you're quoting. There are two organizations. One is called Equality Labs and the other is Abbas. Both of them had flagged a number of these posts, including that of Raja Singh, to Facebook. And till Wall Street Journal raised this issue, they had taken no action. In fact, their action against Raja Singh removing him the platform is September 4th, a long time after all of this had passed. Now, if you look at another article, which is basically BuzzFeed, that has talked about Sophie Zhang, somebody who was in Facebook, was involved in trying to internally control this kind of hate speech and communal propaganda, fake news. Sophie Zhang's parting note to Facebook says categorically, and this is an important issue, that only response that Facebook makes is if it becomes public from a major news channel in either United States or European Union.
I see.
These are the only two places Facebook takes cognizance of criticism. In all other places, they take no cognizance of criticisms. And they, in fact, only reacted to this complaint, not when others have flagged it, not when it was flagged internally by their own staff, saying these three are what can be designated as dangerous individuals by Facebook standard, and acted only when Wall Street Journal made this an embarrassment for Facebook. And I think this is a question, more than me, it should be asked of Facebook. And I'm sorry to hear that Facebook did not turn up for your hearing and did not defend itself or explain why they did not take action. Because that is something they need to explain, not people like us who are outside Facebook.
Look, that matter is pending before the Honorable Supreme Court, so I can't possibly comment on it. Or, in India, sought feedback or comment for a story from Facebook on such an issue.
Raja Singh's incendiary comments are available on Indian media. They have flagged it a number of times. In fact, the statement about shooting Rohingyas is again something which is even worse because Rohingyas have been accepted internationally as a genocidal violence. So the fact that he was on record in Indian media did not have any repercussion on Facebook. Facebook still refused to take it down. And if you go by what the Wall Street Journal's article is, then it also says why. It says that there was an understanding in Facebook leadership in India, and Akhidas is mentioned, who is certainly or probably the most influential person in Facebook in India, that her role has been also identified, saying that it's in our business interest that we do not do anything against the BJP, and therefore we should go soft on this. And if you look at Facebook's huge investment in Jio, which would have needed government permission, maybe that is also the business interest of Facebook speaking.
Right. Now, another excerpt from the article written by you, which I'm going to quote to you, is unfortunately the interest of tech companies with this much capital are less and less often aligning with the interest of society. This is becoming clearer with the case of Facebook, as 98.5% of its income is from advertisements. Advertisements depend on the number of views, and the virality of posts and engagement are the main drivers of Facebook's revenue model. Facebook has discovered, as MIT researchers did, that hate and fake news posts drive virality, and therefore it has no incentive to curb such posts. While it has professed lip service for community standards and healthy discourse, the driving force of its business empire comes from its need to have more eyeballs, and therefore it feeds off hate and fake news. An internal study had found that 64% of members who had joined extremist groups did so thanks to Facebook's recommendation tools. Now, this is pretty serious. I would certainly want to, and the committee would certainly want to know what is the basis of making the said statement.
Okay, the question is, why do people advertise on Facebook? The argument is, of course, twofold. One is that there are more eyeballs, more people you can reach through advertising on Facebook. You can also target you can target specific segments, specific demographies that as a business you want to really get. So you want, for instance, 25-year-old young men of a certain community, say, and you want to advertise to them that on Dhanteras you should buy things, or maybe on some other things you should do certain things. Now, you therefore want a very specific demography, and you also want them to be on a platform at which they will see this advertisement, which means that Facebook wants us to be on Facebook as much of the time as we can, so effectively engage us. Not only numbers, but it is also engaging us, that which you look at Facebook, you look at what your friends are saying, you look at messages which you sympathize with, so you get drawn into Facebook more and more. And unfortunately, and this is Facebook's internal documents, which again Wall Street Journal quotes, and I'll give you the reference in a written submission I will make to you, your committee, that they discovered themselves that hate and divisiveness drives engagement. And more you can get hatred and divisiveness, more you're likely to engage people and also engage their friends and their circle of people they interact with. So this second thing is the issue of fake news. Unfortunately, this is a very old thing that you say a dog has bitten a man, it is not of great interest to anybody. But if you say a man has bitten a dog, now that makes much more news. So fake news is known, and this is MIT study, known to go further, deeper and wider than, unfortunately, real news. So both things are in the interest of Facebook to retain on their platform and not police.
Now, Mr. Prabir, do you think that this directly, not indirectly, directly leads to disruption of peace and harmony in the society?
Absolutely. In fact, there is no question that business interest of Facebook in terms of virality and eyeballs is directly against the interest of society for a healthy media. And it's also doubly dangerous because Facebook by itself does not produce any content. All the content are either user-generated or produced by news organizations, of which Facebook is not one.
Now, the committee certainly takes note of your submission that you will be submitting your written responses and written submissions before this committee for a detailed perusal and analysis. Now, Mr. Prabir, how does the virality compromise the eventual execution of Facebook's community standard, qua hate speech, etc.? And has this virality of posts hampered the execution or the implementation of the community standards and the internal hate speech policy of Facebook India?
I think it's very clear that the fact that they have not acted on what internally has been reported by their groups itself, again the Wall Street Journal report is very clear on that the posts and figures that Facebook internally had identified as dangerous, those posts were not pulled down. These people have not exited from the Facebook as a platform, and this obviously is because of two reasons. One is that Mr. Kapil Mishra's, for instance, number of engagements with his post increased by, I think, something like 10 times after his incendiary post than before. So that is what Facebook looks for. And the second is the political interest of Facebook, that BJP is the ruling party, and making sweet with the ruling party as business benefits.
Right. Another excerpt from your article, this pathology of social media is not limited to Facebook. Google's search engine has shown similar problems, as has its image recognition algorithms. But undoubtedly, Facebook has been the leader in spreading hate, politics, and fake news in the world. What is the basis of your statement that Facebook has been a leader in spreading hate, politics, and fake news around the world?
It's an interesting issue that you're raising. Why, whether both internet giants have similar algorithms programmed by people who are biased. The difference between the algorithms that Facebook has and Google has, and both have certain similarities, is the fact that Facebook also has communities. In fact, one of the British bodies which looks at monopoly, like our monopoly competition commission, that in fact says that Facebook has what is called social graph, because they relate to the network of people connected to one person, and therefore they seek to promote or connect people who are of similar views. That's why the internal report of Facebook, that 64% of the group's members were recommended or joined because of Facebook's recommendation. So Facebook's need or requirement to build social networks is unfortunately much more dangerous than our searching for information and finding information which is biased.
Right. Now, you also write in your article, Mr. Prabir, that the real issue goes far deeper. The power of digital monopolies, Google, Facebook, Amazon, Apple, and Microsoft, is not merely determined by their wealth. The social media platforms Google and Facebook have taken over the media space not only in terms of advertising revenue, the lifeblood of the media under capitalism, but also in terms of influence. The greater the engagement that you can generate, the greater the likelihood of gaining a significant viewership and following. Now, how do you define a digital monopoly, and also what is the correlation between engagement and gaining viewership?
Okay. A digital monopoly is relatively simple. If you look at market capitalization or the wealth of these companies, and market capitalization today is being recognized as the key criteria when you look at companies, because the company or the owner of the company can sell a few shares and raise huge capital from it. The Geos is a classic example. 9.9% shares and $5.7 billion of stake. So obviously shares contribute to the valuation. Shares are basically can be sold for valuation and you can raise capital. And obviously when you have 5 companies which collectively have a market capital of $6.7 trillion roughly, that makes them in fact more than the GDP of every country in the world except the United States, China, and possibly Japan. Now that's the extent of market power they have. So everybody else becomes relatively puny compared to these companies. The second is what you call the social influence they have, because what you now increasingly see is that people start believing what they see on social media. If you take, for instance, my grandparents' generation, at that time they used to say, it's a printed word. If something was printed, they would believe it instinctively. Now you start seeing people who believe that if they read something on WhatsApp from an uncle of theirs or an aunt of theirs, it must be true. So you are getting to this issue that there is no standards which are set for these platforms. And like, for instance, in press, there is a press council. There is some amount of regulation, and there is a belief that press has to have certain objectives. So that is not there for social.
So do you believe that posting of communally charged content, hate speech, so on and so forth, generates more revenue for social media platforms like Facebook?
It clearly does, because it seems to have higher engagement, and hate is a driver of engagement. This is Facebook's internal documents, Facebook's internal reports, as well as the MIT study which I have quoted. Both of these show the same.
We would be delighted if you could share these reports, internal documents, if you have access to any, and if you are in a position to share with the committee when you submit your written submissions. Now, do you think that content like this has multiplied or had multiplied during the recent communal clashes and riots in Delhi earlier in the year?
Absolutely, there's no question. As I quoted Kapil Mishra's page engagement is a very simple indicator of the kind of explosion of this kind of charged communal posts that took place that evening.
And would it be right if one were to infer that Facebook has deliberately and intentionally failed to apply its hate speech policies and community standards?
Well, by act of omission, definitely. Act of commission, you have to only rely on Constituent Journal reporting of what we know.
Fair enough.
Internally.
And what are the possible repercussions that you see with Facebook's exclusive ability to influence the masses?
Well, I will not say exclusive ability. We have also certain television channels. We have certain other digital platforms.
Okay.
Yes, Facebook is the biggest one. And therefore, that is the one which poses a bigger danger than others.
Right. Now, I'm going to read out another excerpt from your article. There are two issues we need to recognize. The first is that the media is not just any other business, but it is important for democracy. And the second is that monopoly by itself is also a danger to democracy. US Supreme Court Judge Louis Brandeis is widely quoted to have said, "We may have democracy or we may have wealth concentrated in the hands of few, but we can't have both." Now, does this monopoly-like situation or monopolization enable them to twist out of shape their legal and regulatory structures?
Obviously, this is a very old argument that if there is money, too much concentration of wealth, then it distorts the regulatory structures through what is called regulatory capture. People can be bought, institutions can be suborned, and ultimately politics also plays a role, and political power can also be suborned.
Now, what the impact? What is the impact of Facebook's monopolization of social media with respect to the social political fabric of this country, as well as Indian democracy, and in particular free and fair elections?
Well, there are two sets of issues here. What we have talked about, the distortion in terms of people's perception and people's knowledge, which Facebook can influence by the virtue of the outsized power it wields in social media. The second is even more dangerous, because elections can also be suborned by the kind of information that people get and the kind of advertising that takes place. And the fact that the whole process of Facebook's approach to electoral advertisement is extremely opaque. It has claimed it makes certain things open, transparent, but the reality is it hides far more than it reveals. And therefore we do not know how much money is paid during elections through Facebook's advertising policy.
You write in your article that Facebook has been the primary playground of trolls aided by Facebook's algorithms. Now, do you believe that the algorithms or artificial intelligence of Facebook has been manipulated for vested interests and vested reasons?
There are two parts to it. When I write an algorithm, and I do write them or have written them in the past, any algorithm has an objective. What is it that you're trying to optimize? And if you're trying to optimize engagement, if you're trying to optimize number of eyeballs, how to maximize number of eyeballs, then and you say, but I don't want it to be like A, B, C, D, then the objective still overrides what are the constraints you are setting. So effectively, if you talk about Facebook, its algorithms essentially want to maximize engagement and eyeballs, and that is why, from recommendations of fellow trolls to the pages you see, the posts you see, all of it is governed by these kind of objects which have been baked into the tools themselves. So I think it's very important to understand mathematics does not work as if it's outside the social influence. It works because it also takes into account the social objectives you have given.
You, in your article, also write that there is increasing evidence that the support that Facebook provides to various right-wing figures and hate speech is not an accident, but part of its strategy. What evidence do you have with you which supports this allegation, and what gains does this strategy stand for?
Well, I think one should really go through Sophie Zhang's detailed expose that she has made of the alliance between the right wing, the trolls, and what role they have played in Facebook. And the fact that Facebook spent very little money trying to stop any of this. And the Bloomberg article which said it was not just not paying enough money, not spending enough resources for this, but also that they acted very closely with right-wing political formations in different countries. And in fact, that article identifies India, Brazil as two countries apart from the United States. Of course, the United States has been much more public because of Cambridge Analytica. But what is not known so well is the fact that Facebook also played a very close role with Donald Trump's election. And that's what the 2017 Bloomberg article refers to. So I think the evidence is all there.
Okay. You also write that a recent Wall Street Journal article titled "Facebook's Hate Speech Rules Collide with Indian Politics" has blown the lid off Facebook's unholy alliance with the Bharatiya Janata Party, the right-wing ruling party in India. What is the basis of your assertion in this article?
The fact that internal reports of Facebook clearly indicated the Facebook leadership in India, backed by its leadership in the United States, did not want to take action against any of the BJP hate speech, even when it had been flagged repeatedly, both externally and internally.
When you talk of leadership, what all does leadership comprise of? Qua Facebook India, qua Facebook INC in the US?
Well, in India, Aarti Das was the most influential figure in Facebook for quite some time. She is the policy head for, I think, South Asia, Southeast Asia, and I think Central Asia. But people know that she's very well, she's more influential than the post would suggest. And if you talk about Facebook, let's face it, this goes right up to Mark Zuckerberg. And the fact that Facebook's policies, from all internal memos which have also been leaked on a number of occasions, a lot of them was leaked in the United Kingdom because they got hold of a lot of Zuckerberg's internal documents. And also the congressional hearings. There is a huge amount of evidence that has been produced over there. It's very clear that Mark Zuckerberg controls the direction in which Facebook goes.
Very interesting. That's a very, very valuable input for the committee, I must say. Now, you also write in this article, in the language of new tech, hate speech is not a bug in the system of social media, but a basic feature. The problem of hate speech cannot be solved by politely petitioning the Zuckerbergs of digital monopoly platforms to behave more responsibly. It needs, at the very least, breaking up their monopolies and regulating them as public utilities. Now, do you think it's a far cry to expect social media platforms to do self-regulation and with respect to hate speech, and it requires strong regulations to curb the hate speech?
Well, I think the answer is obvious, because if it is in your self-interest to promote hate speech or protect hate speech, obviously you will not regulate yourself. So forget us alone. If the United States Congress has suggested that this is the
Right.
Congressional Committee staff report,
Right.
which has said that it needs to be regulated, and so broken up. In fact, they go further, regulated and break them up.
Right.
This is the report that the Congressional staff of the committee has suggested.
Right.
And the same thing has been suggested by the competition equivalent body in the UK, which is like, as I said, our competition commission, who also have talked about regulating them as public utilities. So I think the time has come to not petition them, but also put in place regulatory framework which forces them to be transparent, opens, all that addressing complaints that people are making to Facebook about their hate speech, as well as also making clear that all these things should be treated as accessible to the public, transparent to the public, as well as to the election commission. Because ultimately, it's not just the day-to-day democracy and media we are talking about, information we are talking about, it's also the election.
So yes, exactly. So what are the ways by which our democracy can break the digital monopoly before it's too late?
Well, one of the things should be, of course, to break up Facebook itself even in India. Now, that is something that we need to think about, as well as Google, as well as Amazon. So these are things that we could think about. But given the size of these companies, for the Indian state to take them on might be difficult. At least what we should do is to open them that if there is a complaint, we want to know who addresses the complaint, what is the decision that has been taken, and that should be publicly made available. So if it is being treated by, say, just computers, we'd like to know that human being hasn't looked at it. Then we should have the option to be able to flag it to human being. And we should know who has put the complaint, what is the action, and what is the redress we have also left to the courts or a regulatory body that is set up for this purpose.
So we have also, Mr. Prabir, received some complaints where it has been asserted that there is lack of transparency, lack of accountability with respect to the hierarchical structure or the grievance redressal mechanism and the disciplinary authorities within Facebook. Now, is this a legit concern?
Of course, because if there are no structures, there is nobody responsible. And if nobody is responsible, then of course nobody will act.
And what is its impact on disruption of peace and harmony in society, according to you?
Because the most flagrant violation of standards which we take for granted in Indian law, that you cannot do A, B, C, D things, are continuously violated by Facebook. That you can make caste comments, you can make communal comments, you can incite people for hatred. All of these are being done on a regular basis on Facebook without any interest by us.
Mr. Prabir, our last question to you is, are there any recommendations that you would like to make in the form of checks and balances in order to ensure that such monopolies or the monopolization of social media does not harm the social, cultural, as well as the fabric of a secular republic like India?
I would say that this is something I would like to give you in writing, the committee in writing, because
Very
it's too facile if I want to do it extempore.
Right.
And secondly, I would also suggest that we should, at the very least, to see how we can reduce the harm, even if we can't stop the harm.
Fair enough. Thank you so much, Mr. Prabir, for appearing before this committee, and we would eagerly await your written submissions, including some recommendations before this committee. Thank you very much for joining.
Thank you very much for giving me an opportunity to speak to your committee.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. The committee will adjourn for 5 minutes and then we'll have the second witness. 5 मिनट के ब्रेक के बाद हम अपने दूसरे गवाह को पेश करके इसकी कार्रवाई को आगे बढ़ाएंगे। शुक्रिया। ये वाला अब अगला वाला छोटा ही होगा आई थिंक। हाँ बहुत दिक्कत आई है।
सिंगल कैमरा है ना, ऊपर नीचे कभी वाइड भी तो दिखाना पड़ेगा ना, किन से बात कर रहा है।
तो नहीं आया।
नहीं सही तो है, लेकिन ये है ना कि थोड़ा सा अप डाउन हो रहा है। यहाँ ले लें, आपको ले लें, फिर इनको ले लें, कभी वाइड दिखाना, फिर क्लोज जा रहा है।
ठीक है,
और कोई प्रॉब्लम तो नहीं है?
नहीं एक ना आप इसको बोलना जो भी है हर जगह से फोटो ले लेगा, जैसे हॉल में लाइव रोक दिया है। लाइव आप लाइव रोक दीजिए ना, लाइव रोक दीजिए। 5 मिनट की ब्रेक है तो लाइव रोक दीजिए। दूसरे विटनेस को कनेक्ट कर दीजिए। मैं आपको ये कह रहा हूँ बराबर और मेरे को भेज दो, अभी भेज देना मुझे।